Hey man, so I just wanted to make a quick, very simple, raw video about my background. I get a lot of questions about my past and how I got into the work that I'm doing today. And so I just wanted to open myself up a little bit, be a little bit more vulnerable, and share that with you because it's very easy to consume videos and content and insights from someone, and a lot of times you feel like you don't really know them. And while I do have videos on my channel where I go more in depth, I just thought it was time to make a more concentrated, simple video, kind of digging a bit more into my background. So that's what I'm going to do. When I was a kid, I was raised in a very fundamentalist Christian home, and my parents were amazing, honestly. Like, they had very good intentions. They wanted me to grow up within that religious understanding and tradition. And I remember even at a very young age, they would always kind of shun the word religion. They'd say, no, it's not religion, it's a relationship, right? With God and with Jesus and things like that. But I remember even as a little kid having a lot of fear, like this sin consciousness that I was this wretched human being who was born a sinner and fundamentally flawed, and I needed saving. I needed some kind of blood sacrifice in order for me to be worthy of God's love. Hence, Jesus dying, the resurrection, that whole thing. There was also a lot of fear that I had growing up with the idea of the rapture. I remember we were taught in church that any day now, Jesus is going to come breaking through those clouds and nothing's going to matter. All the evildoers will be put in their place, and us righteous people who have the right doctrine and the right beliefs, we're going to be swept up and we're going to go to heaven, and the rest of the world is going to burn in hell, essentially. And obviously, it wasn't presented that way. It was presented in a very like, oh, it's great news, you know? But I'm a father now, and I've got a 5-year-old son. And this precious young boy believes everything that I tell him. There is nothing that I could say to him that he wouldn't believe because he trusts me. And I can honestly, at this point, indoctrinate him with any belief. If I tell him that Santa Claus is real, he's going to believe it. If I tell him that unicorns are real, he's going to believe it. Now, all this to be said, I have found my way back to God. And I had to actually go through hell to truly understand what that word means. Because that word God, it gets thrown around so flippantly. Everyone who has a certain belief or certain identification with religion, God this, God that. But what most people won't admit to you, because they can't admit to themselves, is what they believe in is the idea of God. Rather, it's someone else's idea of God. And I got to a point in my life, in my late 20s, early 30s, where I thought that I was rejecting God, because being taught that people of other religions are evil and they're going to hell, people of alternate lifestyles, homosexuals, these people, they're living in sin, they're going to hell. When I started to reject those beliefs, I thought it was me rejecting God. But what I have found now in hindsight, that it was me rejecting other people's idea of God. And I took on this identity as being an atheist. And then that's where my journey of really just like self-improvement started, of like white knuckling, like, let me get into great shape, let me learn how to make money, let me figure out how to get my career in order. It's me against the world. And in a lot of ways, that was actually a really important stage because it was like this empowerment stage. I went from this victim who was at the mercy of the will of God, regardless of what I desired or didn't desire, and I just had to accept that. But when I rejected that for a time, I went through that self-empowerment stage. I was like listening to a lot of Tony Robbins, and I was reading a lot of books. People like David Goggins really spoke to me, just that white knuckling effort. And I learned a lot through that stage. But inevitably, I hit a wall because I had decades of buried emotion and pain that I thought that I just pushed through, but really it was just pushed down. And a lot of men do this. We're taught that we need to be strong, that we need to be stoic, that we need to be like this mountain. And that's partially true. It's a half truth. If you've got family and you've got responsibilities, you need to show up for them. But then you also have to show up for yourself. You've got to carve out this time to be alone and to reflect and to go within and to feel everything. And there's something very intimate about that. When you can be in a room alone, you're honest with yourself, completely vulnerable. You're not trying to hide anything from yourself. And going on that journey, I started to have like these mystical experiences. I remember part of the self-improvement stage for me was I got really into the Wim Hof method. And if you're not familiar with Wim Hof, he's like the Iceman. He's responsible for all these records. He can hike into the cold mountains, like practically in his underwear, and he doesn't get frostbite. And he holds all kinds of like crazy records, things that are unexplainable by science. And he accredits it to this certain kind of breath work mixed with gradual cold exposure. And so, I got into that for a time because I was like, oh man, cold exposure. That's tough. That's that's going to make me more rigid, more hard, stronger. And I started adamantly doing Wim Hof's breath work every morning. And I was married at the time. And I'll never forget, there was this one day where I had my first psychedelic experience. And it was completely on accident. I'm in the midst of my atheism stage, and I come face to face with this benevolent presence. And it's ineffable. I can't really put it into words. And it didn't last long. It was like 5 or 10 minutes. And then when I snapped out of it, I'm laying on the ground. I had tears all over my face, and I didn't even remember crying. And I was like, whoa, like what happened? It was like waking up from a dream. And I just had this sense that everything was okay. And this is after years and years of being deep in atheism, rejecting all aspects of Christianity, right? All of it's a fairy tale to me at this point. And I'll never forget that day, I went downstairs. My wife at the time, she's like, you good? She's like, it sounded like you were making some weird noises upstairs. And I was just like, yeah, like I think I saw God. And she was like, what? And I was like, I don't know. Just kind of like brushed it off. But that experience planted a major seed, from that point, up until this point, I'd been through a lot of pain in my life. I'd been through the loss of my father. He committed suicide when I was a teenager. I went through a really hard breakup. I was in a 4-year relationship, got cheated on, went down the whole path of, I wouldn't go as far as say like hating women, but had just like that. I started to put all women in the group of being a certain way, and then that became my reality because I was so convinced that all women had a certain mentality, red pill ideology. I got into that whole thing. Had a son, didn't feel ready for it. And I remember when I found out that I was going to have a son, it wasn't the reaction that you would expect. I wasn't jumping for joy. I felt like a part of me was dying. I felt like a part of myself I had to let go of. And, I had a lot of resistance to it. I didn't feel ready to be a father. And this is even while I was married. But, the marriage at the time wasn't good. We didn't really connect. We were on two different paths. I have nothing but goodwill towards, my ex-wife. She's the mother of my son, and she's an amazing mother. And I'm grateful, that we had that whole season. But ultimately, the marriage ended, and it was pretty abrupt. And, all these things, these are all things that slowly stacked on top of each other. So the loss of my father, you know, my music career at the time, I had invested my whole life into this thing. And, it was like doing okay, but I was supposed to be a rock star by that time. So just a lot of attachments to outcomes and how things should have been. And, a lot of people don't know this, but the divorce aspect of it, that's what almost broke me. And it wasn't because of losing an individual person. I was losing my identity as someone who was going to have a traditional family. I was going to get married once. I was going to, have a child or children in the context of that marriage, and it was going to be this thing that was going to last. And it just all fell apart, all of those expectations, all of those visions that I had of the future. And it really broke me. And I went through this season of deep, deep solitude after that divorce. And suicidal ideations. That's how my father took his own life. Whatever that thing is, that thing that whenever you're in a season of hopelessness or a dark season, like those thoughts just start to circulate. And I remember that. I remember thinking like, oh man, like I need to get help, or like, what is this, And it just got dark. It got pretty dark. And I remember this little seed that was planted in my mind of mushrooms, psychedelics. And at this point, I'd never done anything like that in my life, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. In the midst of all this suffering, it's like this little thought of like mushrooms, what? Psilocybin, like what? Illegal drugs? And so from that, I began to research it, and started to feel this divine pull towards this medicine. And I didn't know how to get it. I didn't know how to go about it, but I just started researching it. Started watching a lot of trip reports. I started reading a lot of scientific papers about psilocybin and the effects that it had on people with addiction and healing trauma and all these things. And I made that decision. I was like, I want to go down this path. I have no idea how to get a hold of it. One thing led to another. And, this would be a really long story for me to tell you, but by some mishap, some miracle, it found its way to me. I didn't even have to seek it out. Mushrooms found their way to me at the right timing. And I remember how much fear that I had. I could feel that, man, if I go down this path, these parts of me that feel like they're dying, that make me feel like I want to die, I feel like I'm going to go deeper into that death. And that's exactly what happened. I came face to face with every aspect of myself, the darkest corners that I never knew were there. And even if I did know they were there on an unconscious level, I never wanted to look at those parts of myself. And thus began this very unsexy, profound healing journey and ultimately awakening. And, I was reminded of that psychedelic experience with that Wim Hof breathing. And it was like that, but times 100. It was ineffable. I was finally able to make friends with whatever that benevolent force is. And I realized that is God. And there's a reason why, like in holy books and in Bible and scripture, it talks about people just like falling on their face and being like terrified, right? Really what it is, it's such an overwhelming love that it's fucking terrifying. I know it's hard to imagine. It's like, love? Wait, love is this wonderful feeling. It's like, yes, it is. But these human containers can only handle so much. And so whenever I went deeper and deeper, and I was doing plant medicine like every month, I was just like going deep. I was, laying down with a blindfold in total darkness with the intention to go within myself and purify these parts of my mind and these parts of my ego so I could be in touch with that ineffable presence even more. And I'll be honest with you, man, I know very few people who have had the courage to do this kind of work on this level. Because while it's a beautiful journey, you have to go through hell to truly find God. You're not going to find it by memorizing scripture, by quoting Bible verses, by, memorizing the Quran, or knowing everything about Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever religion. Those things are fantastic pointers. But when you begin to actually go within yourself and do this inner work, with or without plant medicine, right? Because there's levels to this, there's ways to do it. You will realize truly that the map is not the territory, and the meal is not the menu. So it's tough to put these things in language, but this is a little bit of my journey. And so now it's an honor because I am able to help guys directly. I'm able to guide them through some of their processes. I understand now the map of consciousness that David Hawkins talked about. I've studied his work quite a bit. And that's how I've gotten to this point. Suffering, pain, multiple dark nights of the soul, wrestling with suicidal ideations, but instead of going through with it, letting parts of myself die while the body stays alive. And then on the other side of that, higher consciousness, a little bit closer to self-realization and enlightenment. And so this is what real self-development is. You can still get jacked. You can get in great shape. You can get good at talking to girls and things like that. But the deeper inner journey is the most courageous and most difficult thing that you will ever do if you're called to this kind of work. And what's cool is as you do that inner work, the quality of your external endeavors will increase significantly. Because as your awareness, as your consciousness, as your connection with your higher self and God gets stronger and stronger, it colors everything that you do in your external world. So, that's a little bit of my background. I hope this gives you a little bit more understanding and insight of where I'm coming from, because I know I speak on a lot of different things. I know I talk about plant medicine and psychedelics a lot. It's something that I really believe in for humanity. I don't think that everyone's at a stage where they need to be doing that. Obviously, you have to see where you're at with your mental health and your own journey. Things like meditation, Kriya Yoga, breath work are all amazing precursors before doing something like plant medicine. And if you feel called to do that kind of thing in the future, you will know. You will have that intuitive calling. So this is what this work stems from for me. These are some of my experiences. I no longer have faith or belief in God. I have a knowing because of direct experience. And I believe that that is possible for every human being on this planet if they truly want that and they're truly seeking. And I believe that that's what various past ascended masters like the Buddha, Christ, we're all pointing to, and we're trying to tell us is possible in this lifetime. So hope this gives you a little bit more insight. Hope this helps you. Hope this encourages you. You are not alone. If you're someone who is doing inner work and trying to raise your consciousness, thank you because you're elevating the consciousness on this planet as a whole, and you are not alone, man. So one day at a time. One final thing, I do offer coaching and mentoring. If that's something you're interested in, click the link in the description, fill out the application. I'm very selective with who I work with, and I can only work with so many people because it is more extensive and more in depth. But if that interests you and you feel called to it, click the link in the description. And that's all I got for you, man. You are loved, you matter, and you've barely scratched the surface of what you're capable of. I'll talk to you soon.